Good morning. This is Richard Broughton from Ampere Analysis. I'm going to be talking you through complexity and the imperative for aggregation. So imagine you are a consumer looking for a new TV service. Perhaps you're stuck at home at the moment and you're wondering, how do you spend your leisure time? Netflix is a good place to start. Many of you listening to this will already have Netflix, and if you don't, I suspect many of you will now be considering. But maybe you want something more, maybe you want something else to watch. If you're in the US, Hulu is a good bet. It's got a huge archive of TV series, both modern and historic. On top of that, well, what else might you want? You might want Amazon. The delivery is a good option at the moment, and they've got the new series of The Expanse. Why not? What else? Well, Disney Plus, it'll be good for the kids, and you've quite fancied watching The Mandalorian. Run out of sports content to watch. There's not much on at the moment. Perhaps you can get something via DAZN. TV Plus, you've got a new device at Christmas. You've got a year's free access. Why not? There are a few shows you fancied watching there, like The Morning Show. Peacock's launching soon from NBC Universal, and you'll get access through your cable provider. HBO Max, well, you definitely want to watch some of those Game of Thrones prequels. About documentaries, oh, hang on, you need the CBS shows and the UK TV shows and the Sundance. And the point is, there are far too many services for any individual consumer in any individual market to consider subscribing to at the moment. They're still going. This slide took about 2 hours to animate. Where does that leave us? Well, we know that consumers are taking far more services than they used to. They're willing to stack multiple subscription video on demand services on top of each other. And that's what this slide shows. Across about 18 markets globally, it illustrates the proportion of consumers who are taking no subscription video on demand services, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or more. The grey bar represents those people who don't have any subscription video on demand products, and that's been steadily dwindling. The blue bar represents those people who have just one subscription OTT service. And what those of you with eagle eyes will have noticed is that bar has remained pretty static over the last few years. It's stayed at roughly 28, 29, 30%. It's not changed. And instead, what has changed, of course, is the proportion of consumers taking 2, 3, 4 or more different subscription video on demand services. They are indeed willing to spend on multiple products. The big question is, how many services will the average household actually take? Where's the limit? Well, we can get some clues as to where the limit lies by looking at current media spend from consumers. So this chart simply illustrates the aggregate subscription TV revenue each year across a selection of markets, including the US, Canada, and a number of European territories. So in the US, consumers spend between $110 and $120 billion every year on subscription television services, and that could include cable TV services, subscription video on demand products, and the like. Similarly, in Canada, UK, Germany, France, the numbers are substantially smaller, but consumers are spending somewhere in the region of $7 to $11 billion per year on these services. So let's imagine all of that money is now available to spend instead of just on cable TV services or just on some of the existing subscription OTC services in the market. That's all now made available to spend on some of the new and emerging subscription video on demand products and the big mainstays like Netflix and Amazon. How many services could the average household support on that level of spending? And the answer varies by market. In the US, the average household, based on that spend, could take 8 different subscription video on demand products. In Canada, the average household could take between 5 and 6. In markets in Europe, the number varies a little more, from a low of 1.5 in Spain to a high of 3.3 in the UK. And certainly public service broadcasting and lower pay TV prices and penetration rates in many of these markets will have influenced that figure. But what this means is that we're arguably closer to reaching that cap in terms of the average numbers of services that a typical household will subscribe to than many of us would have previously thought. Now, there will be some of you looking at this chart and say, well, hang on, Richard, what you haven't taken into account is that households will increase their spend over time, and that is absolutely true. If we look at this next chart, this represents the average amount that a typical household spends each year, indexed back to 2015. So what it's illustrating is in markets like Spain or Germany, the average household has increased their expenditure on subscription TV products by between 1.4 and 1.5 times over the last 5 years. It's a little bit lower in markets like the UK or Italy. It's increased by between 1.1 and 1.2 fold, and lower still in France at about 1.05 times. But nonetheless, spending has been growing a little bit. But then if we take a look at the North American markets, the US and Canada, we get a very different story. And in fact, aggregate household spending has not changed since 2015. It's barely shifted. In fact, in Canada, it has even decreased slightly. So the average household is now spending no more than they used to in 2015. And that means that those numbers we looked at earlier, that 5.5 and those 8 different subscription video on demand services, are probably about the limit to the number of services that could be taken at the current price points anywhere in the world. So that 5.5 to 8 may well be the absolute cap. Households just simply don't have any more disposable income or budget to spend on subscription OTT products beyond that point. The other thing that we need to bear in mind, of course, is sports. Now, sports may be taking a temporary break for the moment, but I'm sure it will come roaring back in the new year. What does that do to the calculation? Well, of course, most of the premium sports content has yet to make it to online video services. It remains tied up with broadcast TV channels. And in fact, a lot of the modeling we've conducted shows that OTT services will actually struggle to monetize top-tier sports content. So that's still locked in to cable TV services. It's still locked in with services like Sky in the UK and Germany. And of course, that means if you're a sports fan, you have to take those high-cost pay TV products, and that brings down the number of subscription video on demand products by a significant proportion. Instead of spending that $20, $30, $40 a month, or even more if you're in the US, on subscription OTT services like Netflix, Amazon, Disney Plus, and so on. Of course, you have to spend that on access to your ESPN bundle, on access to Sky Sports. So the cap, again, may be slightly lower than we assume. It isn't just about paid services that we should be thinking. We also need to be bearing in mind the impact of free-to-view video services on how complex the in-home environment is becoming. This chart illustrates the proportion of services, a proportion of consumers who are using multiple video on demand services to watch content every month. Effectively, what we're looking at here is a stacked bar chart of those consumers who use one long-form video on demand service, like a subscription video on demand service, a broadcast video on demand service, a TV everywhere service, or in some markets like the USA, an AVOD service. How many of them are using 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 or more different services on a regular basis to consume content? And increasingly, we're finding that consumers are mixing and matching many different paid and free services to watch the content they want to on an ongoing basis. And in fact, markets like the UK, because of a strong broadcast video on demand market, are some of the most competitive in the world. Consumers use more video on demand services on a regular basis in the UK than arguably any other country worldwide. This means that consumers have to navigate a huge amount of content to find what they want to watch. So if we look at the aggregate size of some of the largest subscription video on demand services that are active in the UK market, like Amazon, Netflix, Now TV, we look at the broadcast video on demand services like iPlayer, All4, ITV Hub, and we could layer in My5 as well if we wanted to. And some of the new services that have either recently launched or are due to launch over the next 6 months or so, we come to a total of 40,000 titles that consumers have to navigate through. So if there's a particular piece of content they want to watch or a type of show they want to watch, how do they find that in 40,000 titles? It's also not just about the titles that are in the libraries at the moment. We all know that many of the big subscription video on demand service and indeed the broadcasters are investing in a huge amount of new content to drive their businesses. This chart simply represents the number of new made-for-video-on-demand TV shows that are in production at the moment. They're yet to be released. And there are, of course, thousands of these shows worldwide that will all be hitting screens over the next 6 to 18 months. Many of these shows have extremely high budgets. We've seen the figures around Netflix or Amazon or Disney or HBO shows where the producers may be spending $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 million per hour of content. How are consumers going to find your latest high-value show? Is it just going to be lost in the mess of new titles that are being released every week? So this leaves the sector, as it stands, facing a few challenges. If you're a consumer, 3 of those are going to be top of mind. The first one, which hopefully was illustrated by the early slides in the presentation, is how on earth can I afford all of these services? There are so many new shows that I want to watch, but there are hundreds of these services and I certainly can't afford to access all of them. The next one is discovery. We've got all of these new shows being launched. Which services are they available on? How should I be talking about these with friends and family? Which shows should I be watching? And lastly, I've heard about this show, but I don't know where it is. How do I find it? Which app do I need to go into to access it? So from a business perspective, we can flip many of these on their head. From a price perspective, aggregators can offer the opportunity to simplify billing for the consumer. They don't have to have 6, 7, 8 different contracts with different service providers. They can ease the consumer journey by providing a single unified bill, or indeed even offer bundles of video-on-demand services that make the price a little bit more palatable when a consumer wants to subscribe to many. They can offer discovery options. They can surface the top new shows that are costing $3, $4, $5 million per hour. They can surface all of those from different service providers in one location, so it's no longer left to chance as to whether consumers find them. And they can also offer navigation features. Many of the services already offer these inside their own libraries, recommendations and search, but an aggregator in a complex world where a consumer might have multiple subscription video-on-demand products, as well as a whole range of ad-supported or free video-on-demand products, an aggregator can offer cross-service search, cross-service recommendations, and a simplified browsing mechanism. So this all sounds great, but of course, with every silver lining, there's a cloud. Aggregators offer the opportunity to drive reach. Partners will help to drive scale in a crowded market, that's true, so there's a positive there. And indeed, consumers can find your brand new shows or some of your deep catalog without having to dive specifically into your interface. But these all need to be traded off against a loss of control. You potentially lose direct control over your pricing, particularly if you've been aggregated into a bundle. You potentially lose control over decision-making around search or recommendations. If a consumer searches for a show, who decides which title gets pushed to the top? Is it the Netflix version of that? Is it a misspelled title that appears in another service provider? Do the aggregator or the service provider have the balance of power on that? And lastly, there's of course loss of exclusive control over your data. Many of the big service providers like Netflix, like Amazon, have tight reins over their own data. But of course, if you partner with an aggregator, that gives up some control over your own data. They can see what consumers are looking for, and potentially, in certain circumstances, they can see what consumers are watching. So in those instances, when it comes up for the next round of renegotiations for distribution, you may find that that loss of data comes back to bite you. So the exact point at which this balances will be different if you're a small or a large service. And depending on the stage of your life cycle, if you're a new service, you may decide that the opportunities around driving reach are much more important than a loss of control that partnering with an aggregator results in. But these are all the sorts of trade-offs that services will be having to make over the next few years as they all vie for their position in the D2C world. I hope that was interesting. You're very welcome to get in touch if you have any questions.